Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for attending. It is your day to look at how we interview for headship. So let me start by saying thank you to Barry and Andrea and Sarah who are here today to share all of the industry secrets. So you're going to hear lots of ideas from these recruiters about what you can do in order to make sure that you produce the best interview for headship and more support about little things that you might not have thought about before. Now, allow me to point out that we do have closed captioning available. So if you need closed caption, please, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, please, we put that in place so that we can be as inclusive as possible. Now, you know that this is the grand team, BAMED, RSAcademics, and All in Education. And we've come together to put together a program or a careers conference that's going to allow you to get as many practical ideas as possible to get yourself into the best position for headship. Because we know that there's only the 1%ers, 1% Black, 1% Asian, and we need to change those statistics. So in order to make change happen, you are the ones that are going to drive that. So I'm not going to take a lot of time because I know there's so much that Barry, Sarah, and Andrea need to share. But please make sure that you ask lots of questions. We want tons of questions into the chat. There is no such thing as a silly question. We have Carl Guest who's here today, and he's also going to be sharing some ideas from that practical sense of what you can do for your interviews for headship. And I'll also be around to answer 1 or 2 questions if needed. So get the most that you can. Take this as your opportunity to ask everything that you ever needed to know about interviewing for headship, and allow me to hand over now to the team.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Alana. So interviewing for headship, what we've been doing is really thinking about what information is going to be most useful to candidates who are applying for headship to increase their chances of success. And myself, Andrea, and Sarah, what we've done is we put together some materials based on our experience of working with candidates who are exactly in that position applying for headship. And we're also going to try and cover as much as we can from the points that came out from the focus groups that some of you may have been involved in that were held a few weeks ago with All in Education. And I was looking through the report from the focus groups, and it's clear that people are also talking about things that they find that are unfair in recruitment practices in schools, in particular in relation to diversity and inclusion. But I think that kind of, if you like, that recruiter's angle is more the topic for Thursday, for tomorrow. And what we're going to concentrate on today is all about candidates and thinking what you might be able to do to help yourself in any job application situation. So within RSAcademics, we've actually got about 45 people involved in the appointment of school leaders. I think we're now up to over 400 leadership appointments that we've completed. And that covers both the independent sector and increasingly the state sector as well. So in preparing for today's session, what we've tried to do is pull together as much insight as we can from that collective experience, reflecting on our work, not only as recruiters, but also many of my colleagues, such as Andrea and Sarah, are also former head teachers. They're also school governors. And we've spent, several years working with individuals, coaching them and helping them in their development. So what we're going to try and do is reflect on those activities and give you what we think are the key insights that are going to make most difference in people's success when they're applying for jobs. And I think another interesting source of data that we've got is a training course that we've been running now for over 5 years. And this course is aimed at helping candidates perform well in front of panel interviews. And each course actually only has 4 people on it. So it's very sort of intensive and personal. And people do a mock interview and we analyze their interview performance. And they get quite detailed feedback. And now that we've had about 100 or so people through that course, But by the way, about nearly half of them have gone on to headship, often actually in the next interview they had. But now that we've sort of seen all those people up close, what we've been doing is thinking, well, what are the most common things that people change in how they're interviewed that seems to lead to their success? And today, when we get into the detail of the interview, what we'll be doing is picking out some of those key themes that seem to be most helpful in the way they adjust the way they're interviewed. And we'll be talking about those. And we've also got some video clips which are going to illustrate the points that we're suggesting. So what I'll do in a moment is I'll run through what we've got planned for today. But I thought we might first start off with a poll. And what we're going to do with the poll is really to try and gauge people's experience and familiarity with the process of applying for headship. So what do you know already, really? And this poll is very much aimed at those who are working in schools. So if you're here as a recruitment consultant or some other capacity and your career is not within a school, then there's no need to answer it. But if you could have a think about which of these most applies to you. Have you already been applying for a headship? Are you going to apply starting soon, or are you in some other category? I'll just give you a couple of minutes or not a couple of minutes, about 15 seconds to fill that out.
Yeah, I think we've got, the voting seems to have stopped now, Barry. Oh, okay. A few more coming in. No, I think that's done now. So I'm going to end that and share it. Okay.
Great, thank you. Okay, so nearly half have been through at least one headship application process, or at least they've started and applied anyway. And a smaller number are thinking of starting that soon. Okay, and maybe other people, this is something a bit further ahead in the future. Well, that's helpful for us in terms of thinking what the people on the call already are familiar with. So just a couple of sort of housekeeping announcements. As Alana mentioned, please use the chat function to raise any questions. And what we'll be doing is stopping pausing during the session rather than just at the end. We'll be pausing during the session, and my colleague Michael Stevens will be sort of feeding in the questions that he's going to be collecting. So if you write a question, it just goes to one person, and so we'll be pausing then as well as at the end, and we'll also be taking a short comfort break about halfway through. Okay, so let me just run through what we're going to cover today. So, I mean, one of the big differences with applying for headship is that you're usually being interviewed by a governing body, and a governing body are typically not educationalists. So we thought we'd spend some time discussing the implications of this, of being interviewed by a governing body, and sharing some insight. Then we'll look at selection criteria. So what are panels often looking for? And we'll be thinking about, the long list on the published person spec that you often read, and what are the really key things that seem to matter. Then there's lots of different selection processes, apart from the interview, but we're going to focus on two main areas. The application letter, which is important, obviously, because getting your foot in the door, and then the presentation, which is nearly always included, and we think, apart from the interview, is often the most influential, important activity. So there are other activities, and we'll include those in an appendix at the end, but we're going to focus on those two. Then we're going to talk about what you might be able to do to get feedback if you're unsuccessful in an application. And that was something that was particularly mentioned by the focus group, so we wanted to include that. And then finally, we're going to get into the interviews, into detail of that, and that's where we're going to spend most time. And I think we mentioned in the reminder that numbers 1 to 3 are going to be new material that we didn't do yesterday on the interviewing for headship, interviewing for deputy headship. So numbers 1 and 3 are new slides, new material, and then 4 and 5 are going to be very similar to what we did yesterday, just to let you know. Okay, so what I'm going to do is let's start off thinking about governor selection panels and what's on their mind and the implications of that. And I'm going to ask Andrea to give us some thoughts on this.
Yes, thanks, Barry. Well, one of the first things I'd really like to say is that the majority of you are either have already applied or you're on the point of applying. And I think it's worth saying that you obviously know who you are by now. You know what you believe in, you know what your values are, you know what your motives are. So the first thing is to make sure that you're applying to the right school, the kind of school that you really want. We know, and Alana touched upon this on Monday, that there's a great deal of diversity now of schools in the system. We have academization, and although the majority of schools aren't academies, many are, and many of them are part of a chain or a trust, and that you're making a choice when you actually apply for a job as a head teacher. Do you want to be part of a bigger trust, or do you want to be in a school where you are the only person, you have that autonomy of headship? So that's the first thing. And I suppose the first insight about governor selection panels is to remember that you have a choice, that it's a two-way process. You're choosing the school just as much as the governors are choosing you. And we've just, in our experience at RSAcademics, what we've discovered is that governors are often, well, in fact, nearly always, just as worried and nervous as you are. For a governing body, and particularly for a chair of governors, it's often the first time they've ever done anything like this. It's incredibly important to appoint a head. They may only ever do it once, and therefore they have no experience, but a lot is resting on making that right appointment. That might not be so true in an academy trust, where you might have very experienced people at the top who are placing heads all the time. But certainly for the average school, the governors, a lot rests on it. And this can be a really helpful insight, because it can actually help you a little bit controlling your anxiety about interviews, to realize that often they don't actually know what they want. They might have a great long list of a job description, person specification, but they often don't really know what are the very important things. And even if they've got, I mean, some governors do have a fixed idea of what they're looking for, but they're not going to tell you that. They're going to rely on you reading that information and doing the research about the school. The other thing is when a head leaves, it's always quite traumatic for a school. Many of you will have experienced this already. People have a sense of panic. Nobody likes change, but there's a real panic. You know, what's going to happen? Who's going to replace the head? So governors often, they see the opportunity. You know, this is going to be really good. We're very optimistic. We're going to make a change. But then, do they really want to change, or are they looking for a replica of the head who's leaving? Many will feel anxious, and some may feel out of their depth. Now, Sarah and I, we've sat on supporting many panels, and we know that for certain. The conversations that go on in between. Many will never have interviewed anybody before. They need help with posing the questions. So this should make you feel that you're much more on an equal footing with the panel who's interviewing you. They also want you, they really want someone to walk in through that door and inspire them and have confidence. That's what they want. and they want to feel confident themselves, and they really want to understand what you can offer the school. Now, they often really don't know what they want, and what often happens is that they change what they want as they go through the process. So interviews for headships are often in a 3-stage or maybe even a 4-stage. And in between those stages, they often change their minds about what they're really looking for. And that can happen right at the 11th hour. It can happen at the final shortlist interview where they thought they wanted A, but someone has come in and said to them and inspired them so much and inspired their confidence so much that they think, that's really, really what I want. So just remember that they are sitting there just as anxious as you are in that interview situation. Sarah, do you have any anecdotes, any examples of what you've experienced like me?
One of the things that we notice is that governors will often feel most confident in their own area of expertise. And quite often governing bodies will have a number of professional people there, people who are involved in finance, people who are involved in law, people who are involved in accountancy. They tend to be the sort of people that governing bodies are wanting to involve. And those people will feel very safe on their questions about finance and business. Yeah. And they will often tend to give more weight than you might hope to that sort of area. And it will outweigh in their minds the educational area or the HR sort of area that they feel less confident about. So that's one thing that I think we notice. It's always worth having a look at who the governors of the school are. They're normally on the website, or the names will certainly be on the website, but most schools now have little biographies of the governors, so you can find out what their background is and be prepared for some of that sort of slight emphasis in questions, because they're going for areas where they feel safe. So that's one thing that I think we would notice. Another thing I think we probably notice, and this is particularly true in independent schools, is you can get a preponderance of governors who are old pupils of the school, ex-pupils of the school. And that again can slightly distort what they're looking for, and goes back to Andrea's point about, do they really want change, or are they actually wanting the school to go back to the 1970s when they were there? So that's another thing which you can notice when you have a look at their bios.
And I was thinking that perhaps another reason they can't tell you exactly what they want is that if they do want some change, that becomes a criticism of the current head. So they can't talk too directly about that, can they? So they're not really going to put that as clearly as they might do.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right.
And maybe one of the reasons that there are so many selection activities, you know, they do a presentation, they do an interview, they do these tests, you know, they meet the pupils, they meet the SLT, all these different exercises that are going on, is perhaps reflecting a nervousness, you know, wanting to cover all the bases with a candidate as well.
Yes, absolutely. And they think it's a kind of triangulation. If somebody comes out top on all those activities, that means they found the right person. But of course, it's not really that scientific. All of those exercises will be coloured by what they've already got in their heads, what they're looking for. But that, yes, it's a nervousness though, isn't it? It's just trying to cover absolutely everything.
And when we talk later about interviewing towards the end, I mean, I think one of the reasons that people who are memorable have so much sway and inspiration and memorable in how they're interviewing is because there's so much information in a selection process that it all becomes a bit of a blur if you're not careful. And the candidate who's inspirational and memorable is the one that it might win the day, partly because there's so much information and so many people involved. Yeah. So I was going to move on now and talk about, I suppose this is selection criteria, isn't it? And when we talked about these great big long person specs that are often included with job adverts and when you apply. But we've tried to sort of narrow it down, haven't we, to the key things that often seem to be in play when they're recruiting a leader. Janet, do you want to take us through this one?
Yes, I mean, I think first of all, they are definitely looking for a leader. And, you know, there's been a shift, hasn't there, from management and leadership. And so some aspects of leadership are a little bit difficult to define. And there's always, we all have an idea in our head of what makes a great leader. And some of that is based on past experience, and some of it is actually just, can we have an emotional connection with this person? So again, some of these things might be in a person spec, but they're very difficult to actually say, well, I can accurately tick that. So what we thought about leadership is that, well, first of all, what they're trying to do is to visualize you. Would I want this person in charge of my children? You often get that from parent governors. Other staff governors might be thinking, how is this person going to come across to the staff? Are they going to have credibility with the staff? And everybody will have some idea in their head of what that actually means. So they'll be looking and they'll be visualizing you. Maybe not consciously, it could be unconsciously, but they'll be visualizing. Can I see this person standing up in front of the staff? Can I see them addressing parents on open day? That sort of thing. So what they usually want is people who can act the part, if you like, can look like a head teacher, sound like a head teacher, be like a head teacher. Also, they are always looking for vision. And this might be obviously coming out in a more direct way in the interview, but they're looking for somebody who actually believes in something, has a sense of moral purpose, knows what they want to achieve, and can articulate that vision. So inspirational and motivational, obviously, those are the two words that everybody uses. Being motivational is really important, and it's not quite the same as being inspirational, but they are looking thinking, will this person have credibility with staff? If they want change, or the school is going through some period of change, will this person be able to convince staff, get buy-in from staff, and bring the staff with them? Mm-hmm. And then we're going to say a lot more about this later, come across as authentic. So what's not wanted is that, and this does often happen in interviews, someone who comes in, they've done their MPQH, they've done an MBA possibly, and they use all the buzzwords. So they have everything is framed within some kind of academic framework about leadership. They don't want that. So they want you to talk to them in a way that they can actually understand. And that means being authentic. And then readiness, because I think a lot of us go for headships a little bit too early. And then we learn from each time we go through a process. But you can tell when someone's ready. And I think that's rather difficult to define. But that is what governors are looking for. Could this person walk in the door tomorrow and be able to take on that job?
And we'll talk later about how some of these things might come across in an interview itself, won't we?
Yeah.
I was just thinking, yeah, please, Sarah.
Sarah, yes.
I had quite an interesting comment in last week when I was involved with governors in I think, the second process of interviewing before the final interviews. And there was the usual discussion, they couldn't quite make their minds up. And one of the governors said, well, let's think, is this somebody who we'd actually like to have another conversation with? And that was quite a helpful thing, because it was sort of the inspiring bit, but it was on a slightly lower level. Are we sufficiently interested in this person to want to continue the conversation? And that was helpful. It actually helped them make their minds up. So that's also about the empathy that Andrea was talking about, establishing that connection, so they are going to want to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Sarah. Then I suppose this is the more, these are the more functional aspects of headship, in terms of being a manager of people and or resources, as well as a leader of staff and students. Now, these are very often, and it relates a bit to what Sarah said earlier about experts on the governing panel. So some of these things they're really needed before you go to headship, that you can actually talk convincingly about them. So being strategic is the first one. Being able to set a vision and then articulate a strategy to realize that vision, but to be able to spell it out quite in a very literal way, with some sense of direction and plan. So what they're not looking for is someone, with airy-fairy ideas, but somehow you have to convince them that whatever the plan is, you can actually realize that plan. You do need an understanding of how finance works in schools. You do, often schools, and not just independent schools, but state schools as well, are often in quite a competitive market. A school, for instance, with falling roles because a brand new academy's being built just down the road, might have to learn marketing skills to go out and try and increase their role. So these are practical things. Now, often, perhaps you don't have specific experience in these areas, but these are the sorts of things that you need to think about, being able to talk about at interview and possibly trying to expand your CV and your experience a bit before you go to headship, so that you can talk convincingly about these areas. Staffing, incredibly important, and as deputies, usually you will have had experience of hiring staff. But there's also that other side of staffing, which is being able to develop staff, being able to bring them on, and also to deal with underperformance when it's necessary to have those difficult conversations. In many schools, it is required to be entrepreneurial. More important in the independent sector, would you say, Sarah, than in the state sector? But increasingly, state schools are having to raise funds for various projects, and often just to keep going. Many schools have been in difficulty over the last 3 years. So you don't need to be a number cruncher or an accountant, but you do need to understand how finance works in schools, where the various income streams are, being able to analyse a budget and also plan a budget. And this is often, we'll say more about this later, this is often a task as part of the interview process. So do you want to add anything on those last two aspects, perhaps?
I think all I would say is it is sometimes difficult for deputy heads to get this experience, particularly if you're a deputy in a very big school where everyone's job description is quite tightly defined. But I've heard people talk quite compellingly about raising finance and about marketing and finance generally, using experiences from outside of education. Some people are very involved in some charity work and have raised serious amounts of money and have had serious sort of strategic involvement in that. So if you're worrying that you've perhaps got some gaps here, do think about the whole of your experience, not just what's happened in the school. I think that's worth thinking about.
Yes.
And we put these in order, didn't we, of sort of priority, typical. And this last one, we're thinking it's often actually not the thing that separates candidates. It's more taken as read.
Yes, but I think it is important. It's something that kind of leadership in schools went through a period where everyone was looking more at the managerial aspects and the entrepreneurial aspects. And I think being a leader of teaching and learning, especially in the school where improvement is needed, and often rapid improvement, this is becoming more and more important. But as Barry says, it is often taken as read. I mean, you probably wouldn't get to shortlist unless you can show some, to long list, unless you can show some evidence of that. I'm thinking of this, my eyes just gone on the word trusted. I think trust is really important, not just in terms of finance and resourcing, but I think also they're looking at you as a candidate thinking, can this person be trusted with our school? So it's the broader feeling of trust as well, which again is not often easy to define. It is about an emotional connection. Do we believe this person? Is this person authentic?
I think what we'll do is we'll go through the next section, and then we'll pause for questions after that. So what we'll do now is move on and talk about two key selection processes. And this is the letter and the presentation, because they're so significant parts of the process. So what we'll do first is look at this covering letter, this personal statement that is always included as part of the process, application process. And we've got a few thoughts here which we're going to run through.
Okay, so you will know, all of you will know that sometimes a school will ask for an application form and a covering letter. Sometimes it's not called a covering letter. It might actually be called a supporting statement, and that might actually sometimes be on the application form. But we feel the rules are the same, that the things that we think are important really apply to both. So if it is a letter, then make sure that you address it to the person who is the chair of governors usually, and use that person's name. So people hate things like "to whom it may concern" or "dear sirs" or whatever. It's much better to make it really personal. And when you write it, to actually, having done your research on the school and what the school believes in and their values and their aims, their vision, to write it in that way, to make it personal, to write it with that person in mind. It can be really, really helpful. It can also help you focus a bit on what you want to say. So in some posts, obviously you have lots of applications. And so what you want to do is to catch the attention of whoever's reading it. There's usually a selection panel, which may not be the full governing body. It might be the chair and maybe one or two or three other governors. If it's an LAA school, there might be someone from the LEA, or they might employ an independent advisor to help them with sifting the application forms. It's really important that you catch the attention. Opening and closing sentences are really important. And to write very specifically to the post, to the kind of school and the sort of post that's being advertised, and to make it sound as interesting as possible. You really want it to be not the same as the application form. I mean, it's not a good idea to repeat anything that's already in the application form. So you want to make it be an addition to the application form, which says something much more about you personally and why you were actually attracted to this particular school. You also want it to convey what you are as a person. And so it's not, it's much more important than people often think. And it's worth spending time on it.
We've put at the bottom this additional note about it's an opportunity to tackle any CV weaknesses, but perhaps what we'll do is we'll talk about that when we come to do the interviews. Because I think, you know, we'll be saying, you know, either at the interview or both in the interview and the application. It's an opportunity, isn't it? We'll cover that later. So on this next slide, we've got some sort of do's and don'ts, really, some more specific recommendations. It
is time consuming, filling out application forms and writing these kind of letters. It's very time consuming. But it's not a good idea to cut corners. This really is something very important. So what it must include is why you are interested in this particular school and this particular post. And somehow you need to demonstrate that you understand the school ethos and its values. Now, that doesn't mean making great long philosophical statements, but it means that you've been able to identify what the school feels is important and also important at that particular time, what they're looking for at that particular time. It's important to say something about your achievements, your accomplishments, and your current role. And in particular, because we all know now that there are lots of different kinds of deputies. Senior leadership teams have become bigger. There's more distributed leadership in schools. And often what is called one thing in one school is something different in another. So it's worthwhile briefly saying what your responsibilities are. And in particular, if you ever or you regularly deputise for the head, because this is also about readiness. I'm ready to step up to headship. Why now? Why? So having said why you're interested in the school, why is this the right time for you? This is important as well. You can build on your experience, what you've done previously, or what your current role is and how it's a natural progression into the kind of headship you're looking for. And highlight your relevant successes without being boastful, but just make sure that you highlight what you've actually achieved. And enthusiasm. At a letter with a clear focus, but also that comes across, I really want your school. I'm really, really interested in what you have to offer.
It seems to me that often schools, I mean, they kind of think they're more unique than they are, don't they? So there is this kind of need to sort of buy into that, really, and to really explain why this school. Perhaps it's unreasonable, but it does seem to be required. Yeah,
I think it's really important. I mean, you know, my school was the best school, unique in every way when I was a head, and I think almost every head teacher feels the same way. So, and governors love hearing that. Yeah. When you actually praise certain aspects of the school, they really like that, and they like it in the covering letter as well. Sarah, yes, sorry, Sarah.
I think that use of the word unique has made me think of something which sometimes people find quite helpful when they're reviewing their own letter, because as we've been saying, you're trying to make it stand out from all the others. The governors may have read 20 before they get to you. And one thing that can be quite helpful is reading your own letter and seeing what in your letter could have been written by any number of deputy heads. Because a lot of you will have done quite similar work. A lot of you will be saying the same sort of things. So could this letter have been written by the deputy head down the road, or the deputy head who you sat next to on the course last week? And if there's an awful lot of that, rethink it, because it is about you and making you sound unique. And I think the other point that I would emphasize that Andrea is making is about highlighting relevant success. And I think it's success that you can evidence. It isn't just paragraph after paragraph saying, I am a highly successful leader of people. I have been extremely successful in the way that I have raised standards or whatever. You need to actually have some evidence, not just tell them how brilliant they are. That's all being well what your referees will be doing. You need a bit of evidence there. So it is successes, but it's making it clear what that success is, not, as Andrea said, just showing off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. And it's also, you don't want pages of data either, but you might want to say, you know, when I led year 11, it was the best GCSE results ever, or something like that. But I'm quoting the figures. But you don't want too much data, and you want the breadth of responsibilities that you've had as a deputy. So what it mustn't include, spelling and grammatical errors, and watch out for the apostrophe. Many governors have a real bee in their bonnet about this, and it really is important. If you're not too certain in this area, get somebody else to proofread and to help you with it. Try not to, I mean, my heart sinks, and it happens quite ridiculously frequently when I see 3 or 4 pages closely typed, you know, 1 line space, tiny margins, because that person has tried to put as much as possible on the page. My heart sinks, because it's almost like I can't be bothered to read it because it's too difficult to read. So presentation is really important, and try not to use long paragraphs and long sentences. Plain English, writing very succinctly, but plain English, not too much jargon. Well, try and avoid jargon if you can, because it's easy for anybody who's done a course, for instance, to use the right jargon, and it doesn't mean that you've achieved the things that are implied by that jargon. Similarly, don't use acronyms. Often people use acronyms about a post in a school, or possibly a working party in a school, or a priority. Well, it means something to the people who work in that school, but it doesn't really mean anything to anybody else outside. When I'm coaching, I often get this, somebody will use, and I'll say, what does that mean? Because I have no idea what that means, but it means something within that school. Again, the letter or the supporting statement should stand on its own. So don't keep referring to the application form, because you already put your basic information in that application form. And don't cut and paste from other applications. This is a real no-no, and people do it because often they're applying for more than one post at the same time. But it's disastrous if, for instance, you leave the name of the other school on the application form, and that doesn't go down well at all. So paying attention to this, and then asking a colleague or a friend or a relative to check it over for you, proofread it, ask them, how would you feel if you received this letter? Is really worth it.
In terms of how long, you mentioned that a little bit already, but we're kind of recommending this as the maximum, 1 3/4 pages, and reasonable typeface, if I can use that term.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Completely agree with that. And often a word length is often referred to. Always stick to it, never go over it. Follow
the rules, yeah.
But this is definitely the sweet spot, because that's easy to read, and it will, if you discipline yourself to writing something like this, you're more likely to draw attention to things, because you're going to be very careful about the wording that you use, and it will be striking.
Okay. So let's move on. Thank you. Let's move on and talk about the presentation, because this is, I think, nearly always included as part of the final stage in a headship recruitment, and it seems to carry a lot of weight. And Sarah, over the years, you have no doubt sat through many presentations. I mean, what are your thoughts on the things that seem to work best? And you're on mute.
This is the absolute gift in which you can really be yourself. When you've answered all the questions about safeguarding and about raising attainment, it's quite difficult to really convey yourself as a person, but this is your opportunity to really say, this is me. So we often think that it's helpful to think of it like a screen test, that it's the impression much more than the content that's going to be important here. My general advice is to make sure you keep to the time. They probably will have given you, told you how long it's to be. Do keep to that. Don't just sort of carry on rambling on. Try and have it very carefully and clearly structured. Probably starting at the beginning, saying, I'm going to lead you through 3 main points, so that they know what the sort of structure is going to be. Have a really strong opening and a really strong close, because that's what they remember. It's a little bit like Andrea was saying about the application letter. Do that, and try to have some memorable phrases or little personal stories or some interesting angle that they will remember, because this is the thing, they've got to remember it afterwards. So avoid having lists of things. Don't say, one thing I would do in my first year is to review the school curriculum, and I would do this, and I would do that, and I would do that, and I would do that, because you just lose people absolutely tremendously doing that. I often say to people, try and give them one new idea that they won't have thought about before. So just one slightly perhaps left of field idea that they won't have come across, because that's what they will remember. It's not really about getting all the facts right. It's not about remembering that they as a school won the Young Enterprise Award 2 years ago. It's not those sorts of details that they're interested in. It is much more this broader picture. Sometimes they can ask you something unrealistic and something of sort of that makes you a hostage to fortune. And you can't do much about that. What you can try and do in your introduction is define it a little bit. So if they say, for example, what would your plans be for your first 5 years of headship? You can start off by saying something along the lines of, well, I would want to spend my first term talking to everybody and listening to everybody before I move the strategic plan forwards. So, and then you can sort of start to limit what you're going to talk about. If they do ask you quite specific things about a new school strategy or long-term plans, it's always worth being as nice as you possibly can about the school, because the governors, of course, are as much a part of the long-term strategic plan as anybody else. So that's quite important. So again, try to talk about how you'd approach doing something rather than give lots of definite ideas, which might make them think that you're quite sort of dogmatic about it. So it's your chance to show your emotional intelligence. It's an appeal to the heart as much as it's an appeal to the head. Keep the structure very simple, have the strong opening, have the strong closing, and have things that are going to make it memorable, and keep to the time. Those would be my principal hints on that. I don't know what you feel, Andrea, having sat through lots as well.
I agree. I agree with every single thing you've said. The other thing that might be worth mentioning is that there's a trend, isn't there, for governors not wanting any visual aids now. That seems to be the you know, what people want at the moment. I think they've had too many technical problems, or they get distracted. So that's the other thing. And so that's what Sarah said about structure and being memorable, really, really important. Yeah.
And for the sort of half the people on the call who haven't yet applied for headship, I mean, what are typical topics that they give? Is it often around strategy and vision for the school? Is that a typical topic?
Yes, I think it is usually about something strategic.
Yeah, because at the deputy head level, it's going to be more technical, isn't it? It's going to be more of an analysis type question.
Yes.
But for the headship, it's going to be much more this sort of vision type question.
Yes, it's usually about vision and strategy. Or it might be, you know, some particular priority that the school has at that particular moment.
Yeah.
And, you know, it might be something that almost that they're not sure about how they're going to handle it, but they, you know, it might be expansion, for instance. The school might be expanding, or
or it might be something specifically on sort of linking with that sort of marketing. You know, how would you go about marketing the school, or something around giving a talk to prospective parents, or something around that is another sort of possibility.
So in our appendix, we'll include a list of other possible selection methods, but we'd wanted to just highlight those. And what we'll do is we'll take a break for questions in a moment, but we're just going to cover one final slide. And this was something that was raised by the focus groups around getting sort of real personal feedback. And people often feeling they're getting quite bland feedback from an application when they're not successful. So what can they do? And I guess one of the things we've been thinking about is that the art of giving feedback is actually quite difficult, isn't it? People are worried about, you know, putting their foot in it, saying the wrong thing, upsetting people, and so there is some risk associated with giving feedback. And I think one of the ways that people might think about this is to make it as easy as possible for the person giving feedback, and therefore you're likely to get things that are more useful. So, you know, rather than sort of going in and asking, you know, why didn't I get the job? What did I do wrong? We were thinking of some other questions which might elicit a more real response, a more personal response. Things around, you know, what could I have done more or less of? You know, if you would give me some friendly advice, you know, what would you say? Or even this one, you know, what might people be thinking about me, which, even if it's unfair or unreasonable, that might be holding me back. And also getting into talking about impressions, because those are often the things that are remembered rather than the content of what you did in an interview, for example. So feedback is something that I'm sure, Andrea and Sarah, you've spent many years trying to give to candidates.
Yes, I mean, some of you may be or have been future leaders, and we always say in future leaders, feedback is a gift, and always accept that gift and use that gift. And I think going back to Ilana's keynote speech on Monday, encouraging you all to be proactive, I would encourage you to not be fobbed off with bland feedback, but to ask these kind of questions. There are many more questions, so that you're asking for something specific. People very rarely do, because they feel they can't. And if you're not given feedback, just keep badgering them until you actually do get some feedback. But I think there's also the way that you do it. So we would encourage you to be assertive, but to be assertive in a sort of charm offensive way. So being a little bit invitational. You know, I would really appreciate it. I thought that some of the questions you asked in the interview were so insightful, and I know I didn't really give a very good answer there, but perhaps you could share with me what your thoughts are. So being a little bit invitational, to try and get what you want from those governors. Because as Barry said, they're often uneasy. It's not that they don't want to give you feedback, but often they're afraid they're going to put their foot in it, or they're going to offend you or hurt you. And so it's easy just to say, well, there was a better candidate. So don't, try and make it easy for them to give you feedback.
I think one of the things that Carl said yesterday that I think was very helpful was just give a little bit of time between hearing you've not got the job and asking for feedback. I make a point of never arranging the phone call until a few days have passed, because if you talk to somebody immediately after they've heard they haven't got the job, they're obviously upset and they're not thinking particularly clearly, and are wanting to sort of get off their chest how horrible the whole thing was, etc. So do give it a bit of time, because you're much more likely to be able to assimilate it. And I think the other thing is just remember that you will get better, that you do get better the more that you do have interviews, and the more you listen to feedback, you will get better and you will get that job. So don't be one of those people who the very first time they get rejected say, well, that's it, I'm never going to get, no one's ever going to want me, no one's. Just keep going, listen to the feedback, and you will get better.
So let's pause for questions now. And while we've been speaking, my colleague Michael Stevens has been collecting some questions. So Michael, what sort of topics have people been asking about?
Thank you, Barry, and thank you very much for anyone that has written in already. The lines are still open, as they say on the radio, so please do keep your questions coming. In no particular order, I was recently, I'm just reading now, or summarising, I recently interviewed for a headship, and it involved a 250-mile round trip. I wasn't successful. When is it appropriate to ask for feedback? And is it appropriate to ask for expenses for attending the interview? This was agreed by the CEO at the initial telephone conversation.
Well, yes, you jolly well should get expenses.
Yes,
and I mean, as soon as you've got back home, I would send in your expense form to whoever they've told you to do it straight away. And we've sort of answered the one about feedback. Just give yourself a couple of days at least, just to be absolutely, so you're feeling cool and collected, then you'll get the most out of the feedback.
Right, thank you. A lot of governing bodies are automatically expecting a white person to walk through the door for headship, as they've known nothing better. What can we do as BAME to get in there and show what we can do from the beginning?
Michael, I'm more than happy to answer that. I think the word that I've heard significantly over the past few days is that idea of authenticity, and I think you bring with you everything that makes you you. I think I spoke on like a couple of days ago, and I said, I bring to every single situation, my Burmese heritage, how I would approach things, how I was brought up to approach things, and I think that the more you can approach and understand why you are dealing with something in a particular way, and you can relate that to your own heritage, to your own background, to your own experiences, then I think that brings with it the not only the authenticity, but it brings with it such I'm trying to find the words, but such a real experience as to who you are. I know my other colleagues would agree that this is a real job. This is not a job where you can be one thing in front of somebody else and something else 2 or 3 days later. So as a person from an ethnic heritage, I brought my ethnic heritage to everything that I've ever done all the way through my career, and that wouldn't change. I don't know whether that answers the question, Michael, but.
And I think perhaps when we talk about the interviews, we'll cover that a little bit as well when we talk about authenticity and sort of being yourself. Yeah, so that'll come up again as a topic, I think.
Carl, thank you very much for that. Another question. I found it very interesting to learn that we should refrain from using educational jargon like empower. I think, Sarah, that was one that was on one of your slides. Would you like to elaborate, or just to sort of to clarify that?
It's partly to do with the governing body being non-educationalist, isn't it? That's part of the angle, isn't it?
I suppose the point is that empower isn't particularly a word of educational jargon. I think the use of the word empower, it's not so much as educational jargon, it's just that it's overused. So that it's sort of lost everybody says they want to empower other people. It isn't, that isn't what we meant by educational jargon, but I think that's a phrase. It's like, you know, I'm a consultative leader or something like that. I mean, they just, every letter you read will say that. That's why I think we would have picked out that.
Thank you.
It's about overuse. I agree, Sarah, isn't it? It's that it has no meaning, and everybody uses it. So you want to try and use slightly different vocabulary, really.
Question about school visits. I know we're talking about the process perhaps later on, but I've always avoided visiting the school before applying because I'm conscious, I presume mindful, of bias. Am I overthinking things? Any comments or assurances there?
Sorry, Carl.
No, sorry, please, Sarah.
All I was going to say is I think it depends on the school. I mean, if the school has, this isn't the answer to exactly what you're saying, but I don't myself think it's a particularly good idea to go and visit a school beforehand, whoever you are, simply thinking about it from the school's point of view, that if they've got 100 people interested in the job, they simply can't deal with that. So on a practical level, I don't think it's a particularly useful thing to do, but I mean, that's just my view. I don't know. Sorry, Carl, what were you thinking about?
I was going to say exactly the same, Sarah, and I was going to say that in my experience, and Mike will sort of know this, that I used RSAcademics and the members of the team that I was in contact with to really sort of bombard them relentlessly with questions and with situations and who the people are and what the school felt like, and I got a really sort of a more objective understanding of it as well, because Mike was involved with the recruitment process here. He would have known what the school was like. He understood the background, he understood the governors, and so I could actually really get pinpointed questions from the team, and it was far more useful than actually visiting the school itself.
The other thing you can do it so that you're not bothering the school is you can actually go to the area if you don't know the area, and you can stand outside the school gate when the children come out at 4 o'clock, and that'll tell you a lot about the school without having to go inside the gate at all, or chat to some of the mothers picking them up, or this sort of thing. So things you can do which aren't going to impact and make even more work for the school.
And there's so much that you can research now on schools. There's so much information in the public domain that you often don't need to visit. And actually, I think you probably have more impact not visiting when you actually turn up for the interview or the visit or whatever it is. You actually have more impact. And you're the same as any other candidate as well. You're all being taken around at the same time, or put through tasks at the same time.
So what we'll do now is continue to get into the detail of interviews. And as I said at the beginning, a lot of the reflections we've got about interviews are based on this training course that we've been running, where we've done quite a detailed analysis of over 100 candidates, many of whom have gone on to headship afterwards. And we've been thinking about, what are the things that seem to make most difference to their interview performance, that they adjust and then leads to their success. And what we've done is identified 4 main areas. And what I'll do is I'll take you through each of these areas and we'll give some illustrations of what we mean. So we're going to talk about speaking more personally, talking at a higher level, like ahead already, even though you're not yet ahead, sharing examples and stories, and then this point about tackling any weaknesses in your CV, sort of taking those head on. So this first area about speaking more personally, I think if I was to make a sort of big generalization, I would say this is probably the number one thing that when people change, it really does enhance their interview performance. So this idea of being willing to show more sort of who they are and inspire the panel by sort of speaking personally about their motivations and the kind of leader they are. And one way to think about this aspect is this concept of authenticity. And there's a well-known article in the Harvard Business Review a few years back called Discovering Your Authentic Leadership. And it suggests that speaking authentically is often about sort of knowing what they call your backstory. What are the experiences that have shaped you, and being willing to talk about these in a more personal way. And in the article, a lot of the examples they give are about leaders who've overcome obstacles earlier in their life, and how this is really behind their motivation to gain responsibility, to be a leader and to make a difference. So any question in an interview, along the lines of, why do you want to be a school leader, or, what values do you bring to the role? What have you learned about yourself so far as a leader? And anything like that is a real gift, an invitation, I think, and an opportunity to speak personally. And in our experience, it's an opportunity that most candidates don't take often enough. And what we've got here is an example of a candidate talking about their background and how it has shaped them as an individual.
From personally growing up in a council estate and having very little in life. I mean, I'll give you a real example. When I was in, I think it was year 8 in secondary school, there was a trip to American Adventure. And I really, really wanted to go. Like, everyone in my year group was going, all my friends were going, and I really wanted to go. And I remember, I've got a few siblings, and my parents just said, we can't afford it, and I never got to go. And, that stuck with me for a number of years, because even by the time we got to year 11, people, there'd all be a reference to that trip and what happened. And I feel like I missed out. And I went to university, and when I got to university, people talked about gap years, traveling, skiing, all sorts, and and I'd never experienced any of that in my life. And I've been fortunate enough, to be successful in my career, and also being able to travel, and I've been able to travel, across the world, Southeast Asia, America, Europe, and so on. And I feel like education and the opportunities it's given me has allowed me to do that. And I'd want the same opportunities for the young people and the community I serve. And I've only worked in challenging schools in deprived areas. So I feel like actually there you are making a meaningful difference. If you can get them the outcomes, they will have the opportunities that I've been fortunate enough to gain myself.
And here's an example of a candidate answering the question, why do you want to be a school leader?
I always remember growing up that generationally, my mum, my dad's generation, and all the generations before that in my family had finished school, and then there was an expectation that you just get a job, because we need money and you need to pay your way, and that just was it. The concept, my mum was always said to me she wanted to be a doctor, but that was never in her mind frame. Like, we don't do that, we can't do that, we can't access that. Actually, what we need to do is make some money so that we can get by day to day. And I remember growing up, my mum just always reminding me that higher education and leading in an area rather than being employed in an area is an option for me. And so going to high school and moving now on to being a teacher or, a professional, somebody in the education system, I recognize the value of education on a much wider level. But not only that, I am from this community. I know this community and this community knows me. And that is really powerful in making sure that you are a walking example of how you can further yourself by applying yourself to whatever it is that you want to do. It just so happens that I'm a teacher. It just so happens that I'm moving on to be, a senior leader. But actually, it doesn't matter what you want to do. And I want people who come from a similar situation as me to look up and say, well, look, Miss Dale's done that. I can do it too. And I remember having a conversation with one of my sixth formers, maybe in the second or third year of being a teacher. And I was really proud of her because she was going on to study in Cambridge and that was something she really wanted. And I said to her, well, doesn't that show you that you can do stuff? And I can't remember how we got to this conversation, but she made a remark and she said, when I look up, there's nobody that looks like me. So what kind of example is it that I can do it? So you see, there's more to it than just achieving what you're achieving. Actually, what you're doing is showing all the people that come after you, paving a way and reminding them that they are powerful enough to achieve great things themselves. And that is far more powerful than anything else. So I really make sure that I remind myself of the reasons why I want to become a leader. I'm an example. I don't want to go as far as to say I'm a role model because, hey, other people have to call you that. But, all jokes aside, I recognize that, in my community, and I mean area community, not just cultural community. I'm not talking about racial community necessarily. I'm talking about a community in general. People can see that actually we might come from a disadvantaged area. We might not have had life chances. All the generations before us might not have achieved these things, but I can. And that is what it's all about for me as a leader.
Because one of the things that I particularly notice is that when someone is speaking from the heart like that, when they're sort of connecting emotionally with what they're talking about, then naturally they're more engaging, aren't they? They're more convincing, they're more animated. So I think that one way to think about presenting better is to connect more emotionally with the content that you're talking. So content affects the way you speak, is a way of thinking about it. And it's memorable as well, because we talked earlier about how there's so many different processes and so many different people involved in the selection of a head that often the whole thing can become a bit of a blur. At 7 o'clock in the evening when they're doing their wash up and they're sort of reviewing all the candidates, but they'll remember the one who spoke personally. They'll remember the person whose backstory was inspiring. And I was thinking, Andrea, we can remember particular things that candidates have said, several years after our course, can't we?
Yes, we can. We can definitely. I'm thinking in particular of someone who was parents were refugees, and she wasn't with her parents for about 7 years. She didn't speak any English, and they lived for one room for many years. And how unbelievably well this particular person performed academically in later life. And this came out in an incidental conversation. And we actually said to her, why didn't you mention that when you were talking about why you're drawn to education? Because she was saying very much similar things to how important it is to have those role models. And she said, well, because I didn't want it to sound like a pity party. I didn't want people to think, oh, poor me. And then we actually persuaded her to be more personal in the interview. And actually she applied for a job shortly afterwards and she got it.
Yeah.
So we feel it was that personal, because she is quite a reserved person, and needed to be encouraged to speak in that way a little bit.
Yeah, because our general thinking is that generally people don't do this enough, and so they're likely to err on the side of being playing their cards too close to the chest. And most people, our advice would be to be willing to open up more. I mean, in terms of thinking about preparing for the next interview, in the Harvard Business Review article that I mentioned earlier, they talk about these sort of questions that you could explore that might sort of lead to unearthing, something about your background that might be relevant to bring into the interview. I mean, maybe this is already very clear to you and you've already got your sort of backstory very clear, but if not, you might find that talking these through with someone else is often the best way to do it. And we were talking, Andrea, earlier about how being passionate about your subject early on in your life is also a way into talking about yourself more personally.
Yes, because often people make assumptions about the intellectual capacity of someone going for headship. And you're not often asked this as a question, but as well as the sort of sense of moral purpose and mission of wanting to make a difference with children, I think it's also important to say how much you love learning and how passionate you are about your subject and how you actually want young people to experience all that range of subjects and intellectual curiosity. That's also important, and it's often omitted because people feel that once they've got to applying for headship, they don't need to mention that anymore. But of course, it's incredibly important. It's what schools do. That's what schools are about.
And it can be one of the ways, if you've got, say, not very good A-level results, for example, or not a very good degree result, it's one of the ways which you can compensate for that in an interview. So they're not going to say, well, why did you only get a sort of 3 E's at A level? But if you can start talking about your absolute passion for something that is on that intellectual frame, then that will help that possible downside to your application.
Yeah. And part of what we're talking about here, I suppose, is having the confidence at an interview to sort of be yourself. And it's interesting that the first candidate, Naveed Khan, who's now going on to headship. He's a deputy head at the moment, but he starts headship in September. He was talking about how he changed his approach to being interviewed. So he had some interviews last September where, he didn't sort of give very much of himself. He didn't talk personally, and how he sort of developed the confidence and changed his approach for later interviews, and sure enough landed the job. I think it's quite interesting hearing him reflect on how he changed his approach.
From my experience, on every single panel I've been to, there's never been an ethnic minority. So, you are, and then the candidates don't tend to be from an ethnic minority. So, you're kind of like, you do stand out for, in that way, if that makes sense. You are different, I suppose, to everyone else there. But I feel like, holding your own, and I feel like that has taken a long time for me to get to that stage, and it was just my last 2 interviews where I just relaxed and I thought, this is what I'm about, this is who I am, take it or leave it, so to speak, and I feel that relaxed approach is quite important, like, you've just got to enjoy it. And I feel like the last 2 interviews, I just enjoyed it. They're not going to get any surprises in September or April or whenever you start, when you start and actually this is not the person I interviewed, and then you're on the back foot, aren't you? People are going to be like, hang on a minute, this is not the person. Whereas I feel like you've got to, if you're true to yourself on the day of the interview, if they've given you the job, they want you as you are. They're not going to, so I feel like it's really, I think at this level and at any senior leadership level, deputy head, assistant heads, I think it's so important because actually you're working in a very small team. You're working, and you've got to be able to work as a team. and it's having the right dynamics in that team in order to be successful. So that diversity in thinking and that, but you know, you can have diversity in thinking and challenge each other, but still work as part of a team. But you know, you want it to be as harmonious as possible, because then actually that projects again in behaviours around the school, and you lead by example. So I think, yeah, being authentic and true to yourself in an interview is probably the best bit of advice I would give someone.
Another area that we often find candidates wanting to adjust their approach is this what I'm describing as talking at a high level. I think one of the challenges is, of course, you're not yet ahead, but you need to sound like you can operate at that level. So in the interview, you're going to be asked lots of questions about examples of things you've done, managing people, raising standards, dealing with situations. And sometimes candidates, they sort of have quite a sort of tasky explanation of what they did. And they don't sound like they're talking like a head would talk. We were talking about this, Sarah, that you had some interviews recently where some people got this completely wrong, didn't they, in terms when they were asked questions about marketing and PSHE.
Yes, I think it's trying to answer the question not as a sort of operational manager, but as somebody who is a leader. And the interviews that I was doing last week, there was a question about experience in marketing, and people were tending to answer it in a very operational way. Were tending to say, you know, I go to open days, I visit junior schools and talk in an assembly. And just giving you lots of relatively small examples of what they did as a deputy head. Whereas the better answers were ones which would talk about the sort of the overarching idea behind the marketing. So not just I'm going to a junior school, but would be saying something like, we've done an analysis of the areas where children are not coming from, and we've decided we're going to really target those schools, and I've gone into those schools. So it's that sort of getting the overarching one. And another one was asking about how you develop your staff. Now that's quite a common one, and it's an important one, but people again answered at a very operational level and gave me a list of things they'd done. You know, I do appraisals, I do lesson observations, rather than go for the umbrella thing about actually developing staff is the key, one of the keys to being a successful leader, and then giving one or two little examples. So it's those sorts of things where I think you can just shift the emphasis of your answer a little bit, and it sounds much more like a head talking.
Because it could be quite a small adjustment, and you're still going to explain your example, but you're just sort of linking it to a bigger school aim, and perhaps that's a simple way of doing it. So when people ask you questions like, you know, can you tell us about a change you've managed, or you know, what experience have you had of leading a whole school initiative, those sort of things, I think there's an opportunity to position what you talk about so that it's linked with the bigger picture. And here's an example of a candidate talking about this and a task they did and how it's linked to the school strategy.
A whole school initiative that I launched. In fact, it started out of me studying to do my NPQSL. And I recognized that there was a kind of gap. At the time, I was a middle leader, working with my year group, and I recognized there was a gap around how we challenge the higher achieving students, those who started from a higher place. And so what I very quickly realized is that actually those students aren't aware of the expectations that we have of them. Staff are not aware of those expectations, and neither are parents. And that's that triangle that we keep talking about. So it can't operate if people aren't aware of their starting points and where they're trying to go. And so I introduced a program called The Right Path. But the really important thing, and the reason why it's been sustainable, is because it actually falls in line with the school's strategic development at the time. And that was about ensuring challenge at all levels, but specifically at our higher ability students. And so for this, it was, you know, a multi-pronged approach. It was about developing a program of character education for the students, so they recognized the skills and the qualities that they needed to possess as higher achieving students in order to maintain those high standards. It was about raising awareness with staff, so that they knew who those people were and made sure that they incorporated that in their lesson planning, and all of that represented the fact that they were aware of who the students are. And then also, you know, this community, I always speak about community because I just think it's so important. It's about raising that awareness for parents as well, and giving them an opportunity to come in and celebrate the successes of their child. And you know, doing all of that together, and the end result was, the impact of all of that actually was that staff were more aware of challenge and how to challenge those students. Because I think sometimes we throw words at people, but actually part of the program was sessions for staff members talking about the type of strategies you can use when you're trying to work with higher achieving students, and how you can tie that differentiation into your lesson at the same time as trying to work with others. And so altogether, you know, it really helped to develop that whole school initiative around ensuring challenge in all classrooms.
So another aspect, and we've started to talk about this a little bit already, is and I guess this is obvious, but an important way to prepare for an interview is to sort of get your examples together. So you know that you're going to be asked about your experience in many areas to do with the person spec. And I suppose that you need to think of a way of having that at your fingertips and a way of explaining it in a reasonably succinct way. And sometimes people use this situation, task, action, result, or impact. Sometimes people use the word impact instead. And we'll talk a bit more about this and how you might be able to enhance this to make it more memorable. But here's Naveed again, talking about how he prepared for interviews in this particular way.
Really having examples ready is what I'd say. So for example, if they ask you about teaching and learning, you've got that example ready in the bag about what you're going to say, how you demonstrate improving teaching and learning outcomes. What did you do to improve outcomes? Have an example ready. Attendance, safeguarding. So one of the things I did before my interview is have a list of areas like curriculum, planning, all of this stuff, and have an example ready where I've demonstrated that in my current role and the impact it's had. And I feel like doing that made the interview less easy because I know what I believe in, I know what I stand for, I know what my vision is that middle bit. That's really, really important. It's about how you've demonstrated that in your current role. So actually, when you get to the headship, it's not about talking about, I mean, people often talk about what they'll do when they become a head, but actually what they want to see is how you've demonstrated that already in your current role. And I think that's where people tend to make mistake in terms of, I've done interviews and people talk about what they'll do and you'll say, have you done this? Oh no, but I've seen other people do it, which is fine. But I think obviously you learn from others, but actually it's about being very sure of what works.
So we were talking earlier, Andrea, about, you know, part of the art of interviewing is sort of being good at reflection and good at self-evaluation.
Yes, I think this does mark candidates out so that when they're describing something they've done or perhaps giving an opinion of something, they're not just giving it pat, but they are demonstrating their thinking. It's almost like they're thinking and reflecting as they're making the remarks or describing what it is. And because this is something that heads need to do. They need to be constantly evaluating the school, but also self-evaluating, because that's part of the often difficult decision-making that heads have to do. And I think sometimes people, and again, it's nervousness, I think, feel they have to be word perfect in an interview and it's all got to come out very quickly. Whereas actually somebody who says, would you mind if I just jot down a few points? and they pause a little bit and then they speak, that demonstrates somebody who can think and who can evaluate their own thinking. And it's very powerful in an interview.
I think it also sort of allows you to give some sort of reaction about your own feelings as well. So as well as the analytic side that Andrea has told us about, so as well as showing that you can think things through, it's also about being able to say, and I felt very disappointed when that happened, or, you know, and I felt incredibly satisfied that I'd managed to do this. So it gives you a chance to personalize it by talking about what you felt about it as well, and talk about things that have gone wrong as well as right.
I mean, Naveed had this angle, which he was explained to me, was that when he was explaining a task, he sometimes found it helpful to talk about beginning with what he believes in, and then ending with, therefore, if I was appointed, I would, you know, place important emphasis on such and such, you know. So that was another way which he sort of made it a bit more personalized. But this idea of including, you know, I suppose what I'm trying to illustrate here is a bit about what Sarah and Andrea were talking about. The idea of, okay, you can explain your task, but what's going to enhance that and make it not just a competent interview, but a memorable interview, is when you add in these things like personal reflections, what you believe, your feelings, your anecdotes, these sort of things. And again, it's back to that idea of sort of being more memorable at the end of the interview, which is so important.
I think also it's why you've done something, the rationale behind why you've made a decision or why you've done something in a certain way. Because that brings you right back to personal values. And again, it encourages you to speak in a more memorable way as well.
It's interesting because when we're training people to do interviewing, you know, the people sitting on the other side of the table, and they're thinking about, well, how do I find someone's values? If I'm an interviewer, how do I understand someone's values? I mean, one way that you do it is you ask a question about difficult decisions. You try and get people to explain a task they've done and sort of understand at which junctures, you know, did they make decisions and why do they make those decisions? So it's a bit like you're doing that in the way that you answer a question. You're being willing to explain your thinking, and your values will come out of that. So we're going to talk, here's an example of someone not just giving a story, not just explaining what they've done, but sort of taking that to the next level and explaining feelings, anecdotes, and wrapping it up more as a story.
I remember when I was younger, I think I was in year 9 or year 10 in school, and one of my best friends, unfortunately, her mum passed away quite suddenly. And I remember, you know, at the time, there's a whole load of uncertainty. There's a whole lot of anxiety amongst the students, as well as, I assume, staff and the family as well. And I remember one of the really powerful things that my head teacher at the time and the I guess it would have been an assistant head that was in charge of our choir did, is they allowed us to take our choir and perform at my friend's mum's funeral. And that for me was really powerful. As a student at the time, I remember thinking, they actually care about us. It's not just about education and what results I'm getting on my GCSEs. They actually care about us as individuals. And for my friend, it was really powerful because she had this base of support that, you know, in a time where therapeutic intervention wasn't necessarily as established as it is now, that support of the community kind of cradling her at a time when she really needed it allowed her to continue engaging with school. And we both came out of school really successfully. And I'll just never forget that, because it reminds me that there's more to school. It's about the child holistically. And once you get that in place, that kind of is your bridge to all of the progress that you want academically. And that was just so powerful. So as a leader, I'm really, really aware of how those positive relationships help you to build the correct starting point for your school community. And all of that is what's going to contribute positively to positive behavior, to progress, and ultimately being an outstanding school.
We're going to talk in a moment about tackling what might be what you might consider to be potential weaknesses in your CV. But I thought first, perhaps we'd talk about this whole question of speaking about weaknesses or development areas in an interview. And I mean, let me make it clear that this is not a question that we recommend as recruiters, you know, what are your weaknesses? Because I mean, it's the sort of question which invites you to play the interview game, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of trying to catch you out almost, and it encourages people to be inauthentic. But nevertheless, it is a question that comes up in various forms, you know, whether it's development areas or something else. And I think if you do need to address it, then we've got a few suggestions for ways that you might tackle this area whilst still coming across as authentic. I mean, I think first of all, it's better to avoid answers like, you know, obvious things like I want to learn more about finance or anything that's, you know, one of these sort of false weaknesses like, you know, having standards that are too high or, you know, that kind of thing. Definitely avoid those. But some ways that you might approach this. One is to sort of think about that everyone is on a path and you're somewhere on your path, you know, in terms of learning about leadership. And you could explain perhaps an area of your leadership that you've made progress in, but you're still working on. So rather than being a weakness, it's something that you're progressing and you're at a certain stage. So perhaps something that when you first started, you know, leading people, you didn't do it right and you're sort of making progress in it. That's one way to look at it. I think another way is, you know, if I was appointed to a head, some of my early learning priorities early on would be as follows. And I think this is a way of talking about this that provides some reassurance that you've thought about it and you've got a sort of plan in place. And a lot of people, I think, especially when you read about leadership development, you know, in the last 20 years or so, people are less talking about sort of fixing deficits, and they're much more talking about, you know, learning to play to your strengths and getting complementary support from others. So one way you can tackle this question is, you know, no one is expecting you to be good at everything. You just need to be sort of good enough. And many people see the key to success as you know, being aware of your strengths and playing to these and getting support and help from other people. So I think one way you can answer this sort of question is, you know, where would you be strongest and where would you want support from other people in the SLT, for example. And then finally, there's this idea, as long as it's genuine, of seeing a weakness, a development area, as being the other side of a coin to something that's particularly strong, and introducing your development area as in that way. And here's an example of someone talking about learning to delegate, and that being the other side of something that might be a particular strength at the moment.
One of the things that I have recognized about myself as a leader is that I like to get involved. I like to take on responsibilities because I'm confident in the way that I'm going to complete them. And I've realized that as you become more senior as a leader and you have more areas that you're in charge of, your role is no longer to manage areas. Your role is to lead. And so that means that I can't do everything. If instead what I need to do is develop the people that I'm working with so that they are able to effectively complete that responsibility, whatever the job is. And so I recognize as a leader that I have to do a little bit more delegation, but it's not just delegation. It's not just asking somebody else to do the job. It's adequately preparing them so that they are able to do the job effectively. And that is the difference. Then there doesn't have to be the anxiety about what the end result is going to look like, or is it going to be left? Because I've empowered that person so that they are now capable of taking on that role and leading in that particular area. So that, for me, you know, as a leader, becoming more senior, recognizing that there are more areas that I'm going to be responsible for. It's really about empowering the people that you're working with so that they can do the jobs And you don't have to have this dread of how it's going to come out or wanting it to be done in your way, because you're confident in the way that they can do it.
So we're going to look at the final area, which is about addressing potential weaknesses in your CV. And sometimes candidates, you know, have got something on their CV which perhaps doesn't look as good as other candidates. And I guess Sarah, we were talking about this earlier, that sort of different governing bodies have got particular sort of views on particular weaknesses. They'll have their own idiosyncrasies in terms of what they think is an important weakness and what's one that they're not so worried about.
I think that's right, and it's quite difficult to anticipate. I mean, clearly, if you have got a poor degree result, it is worth flagging that up. If you've got a degree in a subject which isn't a mainstream academic subject, some governors will be very biased against that. If you went to a university that perhaps wasn't a university when the governors were in their 20s or whatever, that again is something that might raise questions for them. So it's thinking about what might be seen as a weakness and then positioning it in a way that makes it a strength. And some people manage to do that very well and some people don't.
No. Because I think often, I mean, the mistake, I think, is to sort of keep quiet about it and think, oh, they didn't ask me about it, you know, I got away with it. But of course, once you leave the room, one of the governors is probably going to raise it, aren't they? And then they're going to start discussing it. And I suppose the other reason that you might not address it is you probably won't be asked. So if your degree is not very good, for example, you know, they're probably not going to ask you about that in the interview. Because it's a bit awkward, but nevertheless, they're going to be thinking about it. So the idea, I suppose, is to introduce it on your own terms, and try and, you know, leave the panel with an impression that you want them to have in this area. And I've got a couple of examples here. The first one is of a candidate. This is the first candidate, Naveed, talking about how, although he's going for headship, he might have less experience than a typical candidate would have.
As you know, I'm really passionate about becoming a head teacher, and I feel like I've got a wealth of experience behind me to get to that stage. And I'm conscious that you may have seen my application form and feel I don't have the depth of experience. However, I'd like to address that area head on, to make it clear that I'm ready for the next step in my career. So I started off as a teacher of science, and in my first year of teaching, I achieved some of the best results in the science department. Following this, in my second year of teaching, I was promoted to head of science, and the results were 27%, with the majority of students doing BTEC. As head of science, I ensured that every single student did 2 GCSEs in science, and I stopped doing BTECs because I wanted the students from my school to be able to compete and progress onto academic A-levels and not narrow their choices post-16. Under my leadership of the science department and through real collaboration and teamwork with the department, the science results improved from 27% to 82%. Following this, I progressed onto leadership, and in my most recent school, I joined in April 2016, where behaviour was poor, outcomes were significantly low, and the school had a falling role. Within 15 months, the school went from special measures to good. Following this, in 2019, the school secured the best results in the school's history, and subsequently, the school is now full, and as a result of being the first school of choice in the local community, our school numbers has increased from 180 to 210 students per year, and we have a waiting list in Key Stage 3. So I feel like this demonstrates that whilst I don't have the years of experience, I do have the depth of experience, both in pastoral and academic standards, to become a head teacher and lead a school successfully.
And here's an example talking about having an ordinary degree. So this is below third class, and it's certainly something that, you know, a panel would notice. They may not ask a question about. So it's a good idea to take the initiative and position it in the way that you want.
One of the things that I think is really important to note is that my degree is actually a degree without honours. So it's it's an ordinary degree, which is important to me because although that degree is not necessarily one of your higher degrees, you know, a degree of honour, your first, your seconds. At the time in uni, it was my second year, and I remember I was going through some quite serious health issues at the time. And I got to the end of my second year and I kind of thought, I can't do this anymore. I deferred a couple of my modules, and I remember having a conversation with my mum where she said, well, why are you doing the degree? And at the time I didn't know I wanted to be a teacher, but I just knew that I wanted to do something around counselling, supporting young people, and that this was going to be an in for me. And in that moment, I decided that regardless of what it would take, I would complete that degree. And I know a lot of people say your second year is your hardest year, but I'm telling you, going into the third year with 2 extra modules, that's difficult. And I just remember all the way through my third year, whilst I was completing my dissertation and I had all of this extra work, my end goal was to complete this degree until a good standard, to know that I have that resilience to keep on going. So although on paper it might not look, you know, that impressive, for me, it means a whole load. It reminds me that it doesn't matter what difficulties come about, it doesn't matter about potentially the things that may hold you back. I can do it. I can complete it. And that is major for me. So I know, you know, moving on, looking at further professional development, I know what my standard is. And I know that for me was that standard whilst all of the madness and the mayhem was going on. So yeah, moving forward, I know that a master's for me will be, you know, no problem whatsoever. And I will commit myself and show that resilience in just exactly the same way.
So those are the 4 areas that we wanted to illustrate that we found most often make a difference for candidates. And what we should do now, I think, is pause, and we've just got time for a small number of questions, Mike, if you're ready with some questions that you've been collecting.
Thanks, Barry. Struggling taking myself off mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So a couple of questions. Well, first one's more of a comment and actually leads us into what tomorrow's session's about. But the governing body hold a lot of power when recruiting ahead, but it's difficult when the governing body are not as diverse as we'd like or hope them to be. This person is a governor, and they say that their own perspective is not also really in sync with that of their colleagues. That's linked to another question about why are there so few BAME head teachers? Why is it so hard? What needs to change? I know that's a big question and we're running short of time, but would you like to just give a short, concise answer to that last question?
I mean, that does sound more like tomorrow's topic, doesn't it?
Well, that's right. I thought it's a bit of a pointer for tomorrow. So
unless anyone else would like to comment.
I mean, I'm happy to sort of say something on that briefly. I think yes, it's a massive topic. I think it comes down to a lot of what some of our colleagues have said previously, in the sense of seeing role models in those positions in the first place, and I find that actually, particularly in my sector, there seems to be a particular model or a particular image as to what independent education should be, and I think, and I said this actually in the conference, I think I was most surprised when I was appointed here in rural White Hampshire as the head teacher, because I was surprised that actually my mould, my background, my South London accent was going to be something which didn't necessarily sit comfortably, and it's because I think I want to be able to challenge that mode and challenge that understanding and that model. Why there isn't more people there, I would imagine it's because, you know, very, very simply because there isn't the amount of opportunities that are around for people from an ethnic background to put themselves forward. So the more that we can reflect upon our own practice, the more we can constantly evaluate what we are, who we are, and what we are doing to actually actively involve a greater diversity is probably where we need to start that conversation.
Carl, thank you very much for that. Barry, I've got time for one last question. I can be a shorter question.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you able to give some examples, or what are some of the best questions to ask the interview panel at the end of the interview?
Well, I think it is always worth having one or two questions ready. I don't think it gives a terribly good impression not to have any questions. But I mean, people, on the other hand, it's dreadful to pull out your notebook and turn to page 1 and the interview panel sees that there's sort of 20 questions to go. So it's trying to get some sort of balance right. It's an opportunity to find out from the governors, I think, a little bit about their plans for the school. You know, what are they thinking? What direction do they want the school to take? I mean, that's one possible approach.
Yes, I think I agree with that, Sarah. I think it's asking them a question that could, obviously, you're probably going to study it beforehand, but asking them a question that sounds like it's something that you really want to know the answer to. And it probably is something like, you know, what do they find, what is most important to them at that moment? Something about the school, something personal to the school.
Thank you. So, Mike, I think we've probably run out of time now, so we should probably draw it to a close. But I'm just going to put up a slide, which is how people can contact us. And the best way to do it, if you want to speak to one of our search team colleagues, such as Michael, who was talking there, who runs our search for senior schools, or Angela, who runs for the junior schools, is to go to our website using this link and register our details. And the other thing I just wanted to publicly thank our volunteers, if I can use that word, Naveen Khan and Zalika Dale, who agreed to be filmed, which I thought was very brave, and I think they did a fantastic job. So we're very grateful to them for doing that.